Please note, in this tutorial we take a look at NMAP for Windows. NMAP is normally a tool used with Linux, so if you are using it on a Linux system, please view the Linux NMAP videos on www.networkingprogramming.com or on the C Germany 77 channel on YouTube. Also note, the Linux command shell, or the Bourne shell, or bash, born again shell, is a case-sensitive environment. Even though the Windows command shell is not case-sensitive, XenMaps, that is NMAP for Windows, command line switches are still case-sensitive in Windows since they came from Linux. Today we're looking at a tool called NMAP, and again, we've done several tutorials using NMAP on Linux, and it's really built right into a lot of Linux systems. I've got a couple of Linux phones, and it's built right into the Linux phones, and Ubuntu, Debian versions like Ubuntu, and Red Hat versions like Fedora. But there's also a Windows version. First, download and install the application. Google for NMAP for Windows or XenMap. So just Google for NMAP. Okay, and I've already downloaded it. And the particular one compiled for Windows, I'm going to try a beta. We'll play with that. And this is NMAP. There's a nice little GUI interface. It's a command prompt tool, but even so, it gives you a nice GUI interface. So we're going to go ahead and install it. There is a dependency when you use these tools in Windows, and it'll need to install WinPCAP. So it's going to do that, and I'm just going to go with the default and allow it to install WinPCAP so it'll work. And then I'll click Finish, and next, and next, and Finish. And there it is, and here's the interface right here. Second, examine the interface. Okay, and I have the GUI open, and notice that there are several selections you can choose right from the menu here, drop down, and they just, depending on what you select, they'll do different command line configurations. And pretty much kind of like a macro, if you go here, you can edit the profile and add new profiles and things, so if you have frequently used commands. But we're kind of going off the old networking programming list here. So if you were to go to networking programming, go here, Linux, networking. We're going to go through these commands right here. Okay, we're going to look at how they work. And so you can type them in from the command prompt, and you can save them as macros and all. But let's go through each one of these. All right. So next, let's try a basic ping sweep or ping scan to discover all the hosts that will respond to address resolution protocol and internet control message protocol on a given subnet. Examples would be nmap-sp and then a subnet, or nmap-sn and then a subnet. The first one is just a basic ping sweep. And you can type them in, print this out. You can go to the website and just copy and paste if you want. Matter of fact, we'll do that. Be quicker. So I'll keep this open, and I'll keep this open. This might be the easiest way to go through these commands. So for the first one, let's do a basic ping sweep. Okay. Now I need to modify this for the network I'm on. So instead of a class C like 192, it's a class B 172. So it's going to be 172.17.48, and it's subnetted in the third octet. So it's still going to be the CIDR notation, still going to be /24, 24 bits, 3 bytes are octets. Okay, and notice I've got listed here on the website. If you go to networkingprogramming.com, it initiates a ping sweep of this specified network. So I'm just going to hit enter, and it'll start the ping sweep and just sort of a basic enumeration. And these are all of the IPs that gave it a response on that network. Okay, so on that particular network right there. So that's just sort of the first example. And then we could do a new profile or a command. We could specify, we could save that, but to save time, I'm not going to do that. So that's a basic ping sweep. Okay, so let's look at the next. And you can print out the command line options for the tool if you want. There's a help section here. And in addition, just Google NMAP. You'll find hundreds, maybe probably thousands of websites, because NMAP's a pretty popular, free tool that a lot of people use. So that was a ping scan. Fourth, let's try a stealth ping sweep over port 80 or HTTP to discover hosts on a network where the firewall is blocking ICMP packets but allowing web traffic. Examples would be nmap-sp-pt80 for port 80 and then the subnet, or nmap-sn-pa80 and then the subnet. Now, a lot of firewalls will block, ARP traffic, layer 2 and layer 3 ICMP traffic. So a bit more sophisticated if you want, you can kind of piggyback it over port 80. So again, we'll do a ping sweep, but this time we're going to specify port 80 because a lot of firewalls allow web traffic through. So if I did that, it would look like this. And again, I need to modify the class C to a class B, 172.17.48, the network I'm on, 0, subnetting in the third octet or byte. And if I hit enter, okay, and some of that was deprecated, but in this case, same thing here, being able to specify port 80. Okay. Now, let's try a stealth port scan of an entire subnet to discover open ports on host that will respond to multiple TCP protocols. An example would be NMAP-SS and then the subnet. The next thing we're going to do is a stealth port scan. Okay, and this, this would be less likely to trigger an alarm on an intrusion detection system. And I'm just going to actually copy this part here, but you'd want to type out the whole command. But again, for my intents and purposes on this class B network, that's all I really need right there. So again, if I were to run that, okay, and this would be for multiple IPs on a network. Okay, let me cancel that. 6. Let's try a stealth port scan of a single IP address to discover open ports on that particular host that will respond to multiple TCP protocols. An example of this syntax would be NMAP-SS and then the actual IP address. Now, a little bit quicker, let me use a single IP here. So instead I'm going to go back, just like in this example, I'm just doing 200. That was on my private class C network. So here's a private class B network. We're just going to use this one here for a port scan. And we'll just look at the ports that are open on that machine. So these are all the TCP ports with their port numbers open on that machine. And if I didn't know, I know it's a DNS server, but if I didn't know and I saw that 53, I'd know, hey, that's a DNS server. It'd be a way of identifying one of the key functions of that device. Of course, 139 being NetBIOS, web traffic, port 80. A lot of these are commonly used or recognized ports. Kerberos and Active Directory and things like that. Here's another way to port scan an entire subnet or network. Example, nmap-sf and then the subnet. Okay, the next one we're going to do is, well, we already really did this one, but let's use this option here. And we'll switch it from a single IP to a port scan of an entire network, just to kind of show you. And again, to do that, it would be this, and then the CIDR notation, subnetting in the third octet, and I'll hit enter. And we're scanning here. And finally finished our scan here. And so here are, the various results for each MAC address and IP address detected on the network. And the ports, and just sort of an accumulated list of open ports and things. So, very nice tool. A lot of functionality there. So let's see. So far we've done a ping sweep and a stealth version, and we piggybacked it over port 80. And we've done a port scan of an entire network, a port scan of a single address. If I wanted to put the results into a text file, I could do this. I'm not going to do that, but that would dump the results into a text file, and I could log it. But if you're running it from a command prompt like you normally do in Linux, that's kind of a useful feature. And in this tool, it's not really, because you already have this nice graphical GUI interface here. All right, so it's not necessarily, but just be aware that you can do that, and that would just specify the file to dump the results to. And you could save a bunch of those and log them if you wanted to. For example 8, we're going to spoof an IP address used as a decoy in a port scan of a single IP address. An example of the syntax would be mmap-ss and then the actual IP address, and then -d and the address you want to use for the decoy, or the address that you're spoofing. All right, now the next one, we'll use a decoy, or in other words, spoof. You can spoof a MAC address, spoof an IP address. So a decoy we'll try to make it look like we're somebody that we're not. Okay, and the command would be, S and S. So let's go up here, S and S for our scan. All right, and a port scan, and this time we want to specify let's scan the DNS. We'll scan our DNS server because that has our open ports, and we don't need that. That's who we want to scan. And for the address we want to spoof, or our decoy, let's use 172.17.48.1, which is the gateway. I could just make something up and use somebody who wasn't on the network, but that has a greater likelihood of triggering an alarm on an intrusion detection system, or IDS. If I choose this option, the gateway, well, that might be common traffic. May or may not trigger, but probably have less of a chance of triggering an alarm doing that. So let's try that. I'll hit enter. And so now the traffic would appear not to be coming from me, which, I'm 215, but it would appear in this case to be coming from the gateway, or 1, and then who I'm scanning. Finally, we're going to use OS fingerprinting to identify the operating system of a specified IP address. An example of the syntax is NMAP-O, and then the IP address. Let's try operating system identification. And so let's do this one. This will kind of get you an OU fingerprint. And let's see if we can figure out what operating system is running on the DNS server. Alright, so I'll try this option with the -O option. And I'm going to go ahead and click scan or just hit enter, either way. And most likely it's either Windows XP or 2003. It's XP Service Pack 2, 2003 Service Pack 1 or 2. I'm not quite sure, but you can tell, even though NMAP doesn't always, it's not always sure as far as the signatures or the OS fingerprint. Look, if you see this 53, well, that's DNS. Well, we know that XP servers don't normally function as DNS servers. They can't unless there's some third-party DNS server tool or a virtual machine on it, in which case you would have a different signature. So that has to be 2003 server. All right, so we have sort of a signature there, and we also see some other things related to Kerberos, kpassword 5, and we can LDAP, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. There's evidence of Active Directory going there. So there's enough there just by the port scan to be able to pick the right one between those, to identify that, right? Let's try something totally unrelated. It's just a firmware, hardware-based firewall. And if we tried that, what would the fingerprint be? Okay. So device type, it knows it's a firewall, and it pretty much figures it out by sonic. Sort of akin to like a banner grab. If you remember in banner grabbing, you can FTPN, and sometimes when you get a banner message from an FTP or web server or something, or or Telnet or Secure Shell, you can automatically generate an error message. It'll give you some clues or some information as to what version and what kind of operating system or software or firmware that it may be that you're dealing with. Okay, so just some different options there, and of course there's help. So you can access some of these basic commands on networking programming. If you Google NMAP, you'll find a whole lot more. It goes into a whole lot more detail than I have, or that I know. These are just some of the basic commands that I use sometimes when I use the free NMAP tool. And this is again, built into a lot of installations of Linux. It's there in Linux. You can run it from the command prompt just like this in Linux. Also, this is a great free, ZenMap. It's a free Windows tool and works the same way, using WinPCAP.